Welcome, everyone. Welcome to bringing Shantideva's wisdom to life with Her Eminence Mindroling Jetsün Khandro Rinpoche. My name is Robin Harris. I'm part of the Tergar Edinburgh meditation community in Scotland and the Tergar International staff member. So I'm very happy to be joining you all today for this very special event. And it's great to see so many of you saying hello in the chat from all over the world. And thank you to those of you watching in English on YouTube, freeing up space for those who require translation into other languages here in Zoom. And if you are watching in Zoom, then you can use the chat function to say hello to fellow attendees, as many of you have been doing already. So the chat will be closed during the teaching, but will reopen again at the end of the session. And if you have any technical questions, you can submit these using the Q&A function. And if there is time at the end of the session, then Rinpoche may take a few questions. So you can also use this same Q&A function to submit any questions relating to the teachings at hand. And there's also a raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, which you can use if you're asked to vote. And if you're watching in YouTube, then you can use the comments box for all of these different functions. And now we'd just like to ask a couple of poll questions. So firstly, what language are you listening in today? So we're always doing our best to make these programs accessible to as many people as possible. So it can really help to know how many people are using this interpretation feature. Great, thank you. So it looks like we have around 40% listening in Chinese, 19% in Spanish, 17% in French, 3% in German, 7% in Portuguese, 4% in Russian. We have 4% in Japanese and 2% in Vietnamese, which is great. Thank you very much for joining us in all of your different languages. So it would also be helpful to know about your connection to Tergar. So if you could please select either Joy of Living, Path of Liberation, or New to Tergar, then that would be great. That's great, thank you. So it looks like we have around 42% Joy of Living, 35% Path Liberation, and 23% who are new to Tergar. So it's great to see you all joining in these different ways, and a very warm welcome to all of you. So thank you, everybody. That's all from me. So now I will hand over to Tergar instructor, Yoshin Kelly, who will share a few words with us and introduce Jetsün Khandro Rinpoche.
Thank you, Robin. And hello, everyone. I'm speaking to you from Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the United States. And I would like to extend a very warm welcome to you. So it is with great delight that I am introducing our honored guest today. We are so fortunate to be able to receive teachings from Her Eminence Mindroling Jetsün Khandro Rinpoche. She is well known to many of us, and for those of you who are not familiar with her, I would like to share a little bit about her. There is so much one could say, so this is just a sliver of what could be said. So Mindroling Jetsün Khandro Rinpoche is the eldest daughter of Kyabje Mindroling Trichin Rinpoche, the 11th throne holder of the Mindroling lineage. She was fortunate that from a very young age, she was able to receive teachings from many, many great masters, and thus grew up deeply steeped in the Dharma. Rinpoche was also recognized by His Holiness the 16th Gyalwang Karmapa as the reincarnation of the great Dakini of Serpu, Khandro Rinpoche, a respected and revered female master of her time, widely understood to be an embodiment of the wisdom and compassion central to the Tibetan Buddhist path. Thus, Rinpoche holds both Nyingma and Kagyu lineages. The Mindro lineage has within it a great presence of female teachers of Jetsunmas. I know when I first met Rinpoche, I got a very strong sense of how these strong and wise women had helped shape her life in allowing her to live with no doubt about her capacities and to become the direct and fearless teacher that she is, with a great capacity to wake us up out of our slumber. She has been actively teaching for over 30 years in Europe, Americas, and Asia. The North American seat of Mindroling International is in Virginia in the United States. She is still engaged with Mindroling in Asia, in fact, there right now, and its different activities, including co-founding Samtensei Nunnery and Retreat Center in India with her sister, Mindroling Jetsün Dechen Paldron. Together, they established the Dhamma Shri Foundation, which is committed to the preservation of many precious texts, particularly of the Nyingma lineage. Most recently, Rinpoche launched the Mindro Lexi training program, which aims to provide training in classical Tibetan Buddhist disciplines to dedicated lay practitioners from all over the world. And it's really hard to believe that in the midst of all of the activities that she has, and remember, this is just a slice, she is able to find the time to come and be with us today. So for this, we have immense gratitude. So Jetsün Khandro Rinpoche, on behalf of everyone here, I would like to express how delighted we are to have you here with us today. And please turn the wheel of the Dharma and bring Shantideva's teachings to life. And so today we will begin with Dita Odur leading us in the chants. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. We are going to start with Refuge and Bodhichitta, and we are going to chant it twice in Tibetan and once in your own language. Sangye chedang tsake chognam la changcho bardo dagne kyapso chi dage jinso ge pesanam ki drola kanche sangye druparasho Sangye chedam tsake chognam la chancho bardo dagne kyapso chi dage jinso ge pesanam ki drola benchera sangye droparasho. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until enlightenment is achieved. May the merit of my generosity and other virtuous deeds lead to Buddhahood for the welfare of all beings. The four immeasurables, twice in Tibetan and once in your own language. Semchen tamche dewadang dewe gyudang dempar gyuchik dongadang dongagi gyudang rawar gyuchik dongame dewadang pa dangmen rawar gyuchik polane bargyurche. Samchen tamche dewadang dewe gyudang dem bargyurche. Dongal dam dongal ge gyudang drawal gyurche. Donga me pede wadampa damindra vargyuche. Nyering chagdang nidang drawe tamnyam champola ne vargyuche. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May they be free from suffering and its causes. May they never be parted from the sublime bliss, free from suffering. May they dwell in great equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. The mandala offering, once in Tibetan and once in your own language. Saje pechuk shing me doktram rira bling shini den yempadi sangye shing domik te povaye choken nam dak shing la che parashok. Sprinkling the earth with perfume and strewing it with flowers, adorning it with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and moon. I imagine this as a Buddha ram and offer it. May all beings enjoy this pure ram. Prayer to turn the wheel of Dharma, once in Tibetan and once in your own language. Semchen nam ki sampadang loyi che drak jitawar che chung de mong de payi che ki kolo kordu so. In harmony with the different wishes and mindsets of sentient beings, please turn the wheel of Dharma of the common, great, and lesser vehicles. And welcome, Rinpoche. Please turn the wheel of Dharma for us.
Thank you, Myoshin and Dita, Robin. I'm very, very happy to join you all today. Before I say anything more, I would like to just give you a small warning that the place I am in doesn't have the best of the internet connection. It is quite likely at some point something may go wrong, hopefully not. But in that case, just to be a little bit patient, and we will try to rejoin you as soon as we know that something is not working. So thank you again, everyone. I'm very, very happy to be with you all, especially looking at all of the messages and what Robin has just given as terms of statistics of all the various people, practitioners around the world who are joining in. And I think this is wonderful. I rejoice in it. Especially, I think I'd like to begin by pointing out, although I'm sure many, many people and teachers especially do, but personally, I would like to really express a deep sense of gratitude to the Tergar community, and especially all of you who make it possible for all the activities of the Tergar Sangha to be so accessible to people around the world, for all your wonderful activities in making possible all the teachings of Rinpoche and the other teachers, for your continued perseverance in providing a very careful guided study program, practice program, and generally in imparting the wisdom and the path of the precious Dharma to beginners as well as to people who have been practicing for many years. I think it does not require me to point out the difficult times that we are living in. In one way, I think understanding the importance of Dharma and knowing the practice and the teachings of the Buddha to being indispensable and to being the sole refuge should be ever constant in the minds of all practitioners, anyone who has had the opportunity of meeting with the Dharma, having taken refuge, being able to sit at the feet of a teacher and receive the profound teachings, and are practicing and studying the Dharma. Such an understanding of what the nature and the reality of samsara is. And therefore, in the midst of all the chaos and the confusion and the sort of tsunami of our own neurotic mind, how there is this beacon of refuge is an awareness that we all aspire and hope is more constant, if not ever present. But in today's times, as the conditions around the world worsen and the distractions become even more powerful, I think for many of us, the last few years of very difficult situations, the enormous amount of changes that has come about, and it is not just the pandemic, but it is in all many different kinds of situations around the world, socially, politically, spiritually, all the challenges that we have faced. I think all of us need more a strong Sangha and a Sangha and members of those Sangha and the teachers that are able to provide the support and become a sense of refuge for all of us. And while many, many Sanghas and many great teachers have been able to accomplish this wonderfully well, I cannot think of another Sangha more strong and powerful in being able to provide this support than the Tergar community. So I say it from my heart. Thank you very much, all of you. And it is always said that students are often the image of who the teacher is. And it doesn't require me to really speak about the most wonderful Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, our teacher. And therefore, Rinpoche's teachings, Rinpoche's tireless activities, and particularly Rinpoche's living example of the pure and precious lineage of teachings of the Buddha are just so very marvelous. And for all of you to have that opportunity to connect with Rinpoche and his teachings, I think is the culmination of great merit of many lifetimes. And so I am delighted. I would like to begin by paying homage to Rinpoche and express my gratitude to Rinpoche and all of his close students, particularly those of you at the Tergar community who are making these teachings available to so many people around the world. I have seen, I have heard, and I have had also some little opportunity to see the enormous amount of teachings that you have been able to receive from Rinpoche, and particularly being very fortunate in receiving the very exhaustive teachings of the most precious and profound Mahayana teachings on bodhisattva charyavatara that I think you have been going through the last years. And from Rinpoche, as well as the support of all the Tergar teachers, I'm sure most of you are now very aware of the Shantideva's teachings and this very profound teaching called the bodhisattva charyavatara Junju. So I personally am not very sure what more I could add. to this. However, because we have a topic to speak upon, and you've asked me to say something about Shantideva's teachings, and particularly the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, I would like to begin by referring to, and those of you who have been studying this text will be very familiar with the beautiful 4-line verse that encapsulates very succinctly the entire Bodhisattva Charya teachings. These 4 lines, which are often referred to as the aspiration of bodhichitta practices, are often recited by many of us. And so you will all be very familiar with these 4 lines. May the precious bodhichitta arise where it has not arisen, and where it has arisen, may it never diminish, but increase ever more and more. Now, these 4 lines are said to be that what really summarizes, or can be also the root lines of this entire Mahayana treatises called the Bodhisattva Charyavatara of Shantideva. Those of us who have studied this text will also know that the framework in which the Bodhisattva Charyavatara teachings are taught are divided primarily into the 9 chapters. First 3 chapters of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara focuses upon the first line of this verse on how to give rise within our mind stream the precious bodhichitta. When we use the term bodhichitta, now many of you have studied, and therefore I think it doesn't require me to explain very much, but sometimes I think we use labels, we use titles or names or uses of words and phrases. And because we use it very often, we don't spend enough time delving deep into its meaning. And even if we do understand its meaning, we don't allow the meaning to permeate. And in its permeating, recognize the power of what that word would signify. Bodhichitta, often translated as the heart of enlightened compassion, is the very core of our awakened mind, which is free from all stains of obscuration and ignorance and confusion, freed from the stains of all misconceptions and assumptions, when one is able to pull out that which is fundamental and the purest aspect of our awakened nature, that then unimpededly manifesting, freed of all graspings and fixations and dualities, that then would be what is bodhicitta. So the first 3 chapters of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, which are the first is called the excellence of bodhicitta, which lays the ground of what we just talked about. What is bodhicitta? Second chapter is called confession. And again, this word needs to be understood very well. Within the Buddhist teachings, we do not have the concept of confession as the word, the English word confession, generally is understood, especially if you come from a Christian background. And then you see that as what confession may mean. Then again, that leads to a misunderstanding of what it is. Particularly, Bodhisattva Charyavatara's chapter, 2nd chapter on confession, has much to do with laying the ground of actually the 9th chapter, in that it really introduces us to the point that there is the capacity, natural capacity of being able to discern clearly what to cultivate and what to abandon. Within the 2nd chapter, when one is able to understand the concept of enlightened heart of compassion, we also begin to, from the second chapter, understand that for that fundamental basic goodness, the heart of compassion that is our intrinsic nature, for that to manifest unimpededly and authentically, one must free it from the obscurations. That then is the basis of where we then see the power of wisdom of discrimination. We see the ability to discern. Oh, I have a discerning quality that can see what causes suffering. And then from that recognition, truly wish to abstain or to abandon this negative action. And also that discerning wisdom begins to see that you do have an internal natural propensity to cultivate what is conducive, what is positive, what is closest to basic goodness, your fundamental nature, abandoning what is cause of suffering and cultivating what is basis of happiness for yourself and the others. That ability is then called confession. So that has to be understood, because the second chapter of confession supports the discovery of your innate bodhichitta mind, which is introduced in the first chapter. Third chapter is then called taking hold of bodhichitta. So now you begin to see, or you have that capacity. And once the discerning wisdom sees the ability to have the power of abandoning negativities and cultivating positive qualities and having genuine sense of regret or remorse whenever one is forgetful of this capacity, then you take hold, the bodhicitta takes hold. And this then is very essential. The bodhicitta taking hold is that moment where the simplistic notion of what bodhicitta means matures much more into understanding that it's not just about being kind. Taking hold of bodhicitta is to develop tremendous courage that supports the discerning wisdom that sees and awakens with the awareness of what to abandon, negativities that need to be abandoned, and positive qualities that need to be cultivated. So these three, understanding the excellence of bodhicitta, then the confession that allows you to understand what impedes bodhicitta, what stains it, and how one can actually generate sort of awareness and strong determination to hold to its pure qualities or the virtuous qualities. And then taking hold of that bodhicitta, then is the other three chapters that then is summarized in the first line. May the precious bodhicitta arise where it has not arisen. And then furthermore, the fourth chapter is called the chapter on carefulness, sometimes also called the chapter on mindfulness. Fifth chapter is called the chapter on vigilance, vigilant introspection or vigilance. And then the sixth tremendous, profound and important chapter, the chapter on patience. These middle three chapters are taught in order to secure the precious bodhicitta that we discover to be inherent of our own selves. And these three chapters and the crucial points and the instructions and the teachings of these three middle, the fourth, fifth, and the sixth chapter allows us to then strengthen the discovery and the understanding of the bodhicitta. And furthermore, these three qualities, mindfulness or carefulness, vigilance, and patience, allows us to withstand the opposing forces to the generation of bodhicitta, the enlightened heart of compassion. So therefore, these three chapters then are then said to be where it has arisen, may it never diminish, may it actually become very strong, which are then further again enhanced and through the 7th, 8th, and the 9th chapters, where the precious bodhichitta already born and secured. The last 3 chapters are taught in order to increase, may it further increase, not only may it not diminish, but may it increase, the precious bodhichitta increase. 7th chapter on diligence, 8th chapter on the most precious teachings of the Mahayana path, meditative concentration, samadhi, and then the 9th chapter of the wisdom. So therefore, these 4 lines of the verses, these 9 chapters, form the main basis of the Bodhisattva Charya Avtara, and all of you who are studying this are very familiar with the subject or the chapter descriptions or the framework of the this very profound teaching. And then, of course, to this, if you add the chapter of dedication, then that forms the 10 chapters of the Bodhisattva Charya Avtara. So in this way, we see that if we really reflect based on what we have heard, if you just take the 4 lines, precious bodhicitta arise where it has not arisen, where it has arisen may it never diminish, but increase evermore. Or whether we look at the 10 chapters that speak about excellence of bodhicitta, confession, taking hold of bodhicitta, mindfulness or carefulness, vigilance, patience, diligence, concentration of samadhi, and wisdom. And you really sort of squeeze the essence of each of these, just the titles itself of these teachings. It will clearly let us understand how the entire body of the teachings of Shantideva are focused upon the single quality of bodhicitta, how to cultivate bodhicitta, how bodhicitta truly is indispensable. It is the heart and sort of soul, or the very heartbeat of the Mahayana teachings. And then beyond that, beyond the philosophy of it as well, for any one of us who are meditating or who have had the opportunity of receiving the teachings, particularly the Mahayana and the Vajrayana teachings, it will not ever fail to make us understand how bodhicitta is the single meaning, single essence, single quality that is indispensable, and it cannot ever be emphasized enough. So this is, I think, the first point that I would like to focus upon for all of you who are studying this text, not just studying this text, but generally for all of us who have met the Dhamma and are practicing. If there is no bodhicitta as the basis of your every thought, of your every action, of all your aspirations and intentions and actions, then one has, I think, missed the point of what it means to be a Dharma practitioner. So therefore, it is very important to first seize this understanding that by virtue of connecting to these teachings, which Rinpoche is imparting so very kindly, what I must then from this gather and keep constant in my mind is that it is bodhicitta in the beginning, bodhicitta in the middle, and bodhicitta in the end. There's nothing more that would become sort of crucial for me to understand. And if that is understood, then whether you remember all the philosophies and the different kinds, especially in the context of samadhi and wisdom chapters, a lot of complicated philosophy and views are expressed, and there are many important things to learn. Some of them are, I think, rather complex in nature. But while some people delight in it and have a very intelligent mind that understands it, there are many of us who do struggle with this and think of it as being so complicated. And whether you understand it and find it easy, or whether you are somebody who finds them to be complicated and very complex and very vast, it is always this thought and understanding that it is the bodhicitta that we are speaking about. And as long as you have that seed of awareness within your own mind, I think generally you have, you will not miss the point. and you will have captured the main crucial point of this marvelous teaching, Bodhisattva Charya Avtara. Now, when we speak about generating bodhicitta, for those of us who then wish to take this view of bodhicitta to the path, and then the question comes, how should I begin to work on it? It's knowing that this is bodhicitta speaking about your basic fundamental pure nature, or the enlightened mind, or the enlightened nature. How do I set about generating it? How do I actually manifest it? Now, generating bodhicitta begins by generating the supreme wish. In many of the teachings, particularly the Mahayana teachings, it is said that generating bodhicitta must be known as the most powerful expression of one's basic goodness, that which is intrinsic to all sentient beings. Now, this is, I think, very important point to keep in mind, because often, as I mentioned earlier, whenever we speak about bodhicitta, and I think that mainly we speak and say the word so often that is what causes us to become a little bit careless about understanding its true meaning. So sometimes it is lost in the simplistic assumption that whenever we speak about bodhicitta, it means to have some kind of sympathetic attitude, to have empathy, or to express something that is kind or compassionate. While all of these different ways of expressing and understanding bodhicitta are fine, especially for beginners on the path of the teachings, nevertheless, as the Mahayana teachings have encapsulated, bodhicitta must be, as is then said, seen as the natural expression of who you are fundamentally, your inherent primordial nature. So therefore, from the Mahayana teachings perspective, especially in the Mahayana teachings, when we introduce the idea of Buddha nature as the primordial intrinsic nature, whether you call it enlightened basic goodness, whether you call it Buddha nature, there are many different terms for it. But essentially what it means is the recognition that primordially your basic makeup, your basic nature is pure, it is good, it is free from the stains of all negativities and impurities. When that recognition, and again, if we go back to just looking at the chapter descriptions of Bodhisattva Charya, taking hold of bodhicitta, the third chapter itself, then is that juncture where we begin to then understand that, yes, beyond all the confusion, beyond all the habitual tendencies of samsara, beyond all of what we have characteristically become, our personalities, our thought patterns, our hopes and fears, that the basic nature, that the basic fundamental nature is absolutely pure. That recognition and being introduced to that becomes very powerful and supported by all the teachings, such as the Bodhisattva and Shantideva's teachings primarily. That powerful recognition, if that is honed, if that is understood, if that is refined, and through its refinement, if one is able to keep it constant, continuously manifest, that then is seen as the natural expression of basic goodness that arises uninterruptedly from your own intrinsic fundamental nature. That would be then seen as bodhicitta, the expression of bodhicitta. So therefore, understanding what bodhicitta means becomes very essential. Now, amongst all of the wishes, now, of course, we're speaking about how to generate this bodhicitta. Now, knowing bodhicitta is so, the expression of your natural basic goodness. How do we get about, set about beginning with, starting to generate? In that context, it is Shantideva's teachings say or emphasize that amongst all of the many things that one could do, bodhicitta in its truest sense can be evoked and manifest as an aspiration in the beginning. And amongst all of the wishes that and aspirations that you can generate, that what is most profound and closest to your basic nature, the Buddha nature, is said to be the wish of enlightenment of all sentient beings. So now this comes to the point where I generally, I think, point out, especially in today's times and the modern day practitioners, because in today's world, I guess it is a problem all generations through the ages, but because it is something that we live and directly experience. In today's times, primarily, we've gotten very used to a few things. The first thing is, of course, the speed, quickly, doing something very quickly, getting something very quickly. You know, you get very irritated when you send a message and nobody responds to you, and you know, you get very impatient. And that slowly builds our personality, our character, to have a continuous sort of an energy of impatience. And then satisfying that impatience with something tangible, something to do, something to say, something to be. So we become very, very, I think, almost addicted to tangible things. So we are, of course, always caught in the fixations and the grasping to something tangible. But even more than that, here we're talking about even expressions of kindness and compassion. So when we, of course, when we listen to teachings and when we take time to ponder and deeply reflect, it is very clear what we understand very clearly what we mean by bodhicitta being the natural expression of your basic goodness. But now when conditions are powerful, outer conditions are powerful, we forget that. And if our practice and meditation is weak, then what happens is generally we become very fixated. We become very, very impatient. We become very fixated on something very tangible. And that then leads me to the point that I am pointing to, is that in today's times, doing something, saying something, and even much more worse than that, I think, is using social media, for example, to express your disgust over some injustice or your support for something, or to express your emotions, even good emotions, you know, your kindness or your compassion or your distress over something that someone is suffering from and so forth. We have now begun to attribute that to being an expression of bodhicitta. Now that, the other thing is then practitioners, even senior practitioners, I have seen often allow their Dharma practice, and particularly formal practice and meditation, to be weakened because they imagine that doing something, a mundane activity, which then they call kind activity or compassion in action, to being more important. Now these, being proactive and being actively compassionate or doing something to help someone, these are all very wonderful things. I'm in no way I'm trying to discourage you from doing that. But the point here is, while all of these different expressions of kindness, compassion, your feeling of empathy for the others are all aspects of kindness and compassion, they are, however, not to be mistaken as pure bodhicitta. Unless that bodhicitta, unless that compassion and kindness that you are expressing is absolutely free from an egocentric mentality. That often is not. And that is, I think, why it is very important to keep in mind the understanding of what bodhicitta actually is. Now, in Shantideva's presentation of this particular point, he really builds the ground through the Bodhisattva Charya Avtara teachings in really making sure that each person receiving the Bodhisattva Charya Avtara teachings recognizes that of all the wishes that are closest to what true bodhicitta is the aspiration of enlightenment of all sentient beings. Now, in this regard, however, again, another 2 points that should be understood is, one is, as I mentioned, the fault of having a very simplistic understanding of what bodhicitta is and mistaking it to being bodhicitta to being some kind of an emotional expression of kindness and love. While from a relative perspective, those are also very, very good, especially for beginners, but they are not necessarily free of a mentality that is egocentric. Now, on the other hand, while some may have a very simplistic notion, sometimes, again, you have to be very careful that the vision of bodhicitta, and especially the aspiration, wishing all sentient beings to be enlightened, is again not lost in some, what do you call that, grandeur wish of just having a very fantastic kind of a thought and an idea that you yourself don't really have a belief of. So it's just a grand wish that you express. One must be free from that as well. Such an expression and an aspiration that wishes the aspiration of all sentient beings must come from the confidence, recognizing one's fundamental nature, known as the Buddha nature, and knowing that that fundamental nature is the core of all beings. And just as I have that capacity, all beings have that capacity. And how much and what could you do in order to be able that all sentient beings recognize that? So having this vision of aspiration of enlightenment of all sentient beings is the very core of all the Mahayana teachings, and particularly Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charya Avtara teachings. Now, because that is the basis of the teachings that have been given, one must also then here realize that the presentation of the teachings of Bodhisattva Charya Avtara then further progresses into presenting the idea that for such an aspiration to take flight and to be able to be fruitioned, the beginning must be in developing and generating powerful intention. So then the Bodhisattva Charya Avtara teachings sort of branch into the two most crucial classifications, intention or aspiration and action. So the intention is then the first that must set forth, because although the bodhicitta, the natural expression of one's own Buddha nature, the basic fundamental basic goodness is inherent, but to unearth it, to make it take flight, to be able to manifest it, what is the most skillful ability that is able to do this is intention or the aspiration. Then such an intention or an aspiration must merge, unify, of course, with action, because action then further does three things. I think of all the many things that we can talk about, I think we can bring it down to three main things. Is action brings about first the support to the intention. So in terms of action, then the Bodhisattva Charya Avtara presents the teachings on the 6 parameters, whether it is generosity, whether it is moral ethics or ethical conduct, the patience, diligence, and then the meditative concentration of samadhi and the wisdom. These 6 transcendental perfect actions are known as the action aspect. And the intention aspects are in terms of really wishing sentient beings, the 4 immeasurable qualities of genuine loving kindness, all beings be free from suffering, causes of suffering, to generate loving kindness, that all beings be able to obtain happiness and the causes of happiness, to have compassion, that all sentient beings who are separate from, freed from, or separated from suffering and are in a state of happiness, that they may never deviate from this, the generation of joyfulness. And then, of course, may all sentient beings have the ability to achieve and abide within perfect equanimity, in that they may all discover the equanimity intrinsic of themselves, free from bias and partiality. So now this aspiration or intent is then said to be, as Shantideva teaches, the most powerful, the closest way through which we can unearth natural bodhichitta inherent of one's own self. Now the actions provide the support. The very first thing is it provides the support for our aspirations. It also challenges us and allows us to really see the authenticity of our own aspirations. And so the actions challenges us. It allows us to further authentically express our aspiration for all sentient beings. It really challenges us to see whether our expression of that bodhicitta is pure and free from the egocentric mentality. And then thirdly, actions allow us to exhaust our habitual patterns. These actions are the antidotes to all the drama of our emotional mind. And therefore, if with all the teachings in the practice, of course, the 4th, 5th, and the 6th chapters, with mindfulness, with vigilance, particularly with patience, if we are able to really withstand forces of our habitual neurosis, then actions are powerful abilities that allow us to exhaust marks of ignorance and all of those neurotic habitual tendencies. So therefore, the aspiration complements the action complements the aspiration, and therefore in that way, we are able to then really bring about the generation, understanding, generation, and then manifestation of this bodhicitta intent. So now in this way, however, before the actions, however, Shantideva does say the intention is very important. You will have come across some of the very familiar sort of analogies given where in the teachings of the Mahayana it says, if a person recognizes his or her own natural disposition to being healthy, it is only such a person who will really undergo all of the different forms of recovery. So if one wants to get better, if one is stricken with some disease, but if you know that you have the natural disposition to get better, such a person would not hesitate to take the proper treatment and to go through all the rigors of whatever it requires for you to regain that health. Now, let's take an example of accident, for example. And in today's times, with many of the meditators, most of us are familiar with knee replacement surgeries, hip replacement surgeries, and so forth. Of patients, there are some who, after such a treatment, really recovers well. And I have often seen, my mother being one of them, is that those who really have this strong confidence of knowing that your natural disposition with proper discipline, you are diligence and discipline and patience, you can get back to being healthy. And they go through the rigors of exercise and rehabilitations and medications and whatever it is, with a lot of patience, with a lot of discipline, with a lot of awareness in their mind, and going through the trials and the pains of all that is required in that moment. I have also seen many, especially amongst our monastic sanghas, who seem to think that surgery is going to do the trick, but then they become very relaxed and careless about all the rehabilitation that goes after, the physiotherapy that goes afterwards. So now, taking that as an analogy and given in the Mahayana teachings as well, it says, if the intention to being healthy is lacking in a person because his or her inability to understand that your natural disposition is good health, then such a person often becomes more sick and is unable to really regain one's health, as opposed to somebody who really endures all the hardship, but has the strong confidence of knowing, I can get better, I can recover. In the same way, here too, as Bodhisattva Charyavatara teachings say, that intention that sees that your natural disposition is pure, and you do not need to rely upon that what is obscuration or marks of ignorance, those different kinds of neurosis or habitual tendencies or the discursivenesses are not the basis of that. You do not need to rely upon them for your happiness or for your being able to obtain freedom. Then such a person will always encounter difficulties. But if that person really sees that your natural disposition is basic goodness, you have, and this comes about through all the teachings, all the practices that you do. And so what is the whole point of our being on the path of receiving teachings from teachers, all the studies, all the transmissions that you are taking, is the wealth of these profound teachings and introductions, and combined together with your own contemplation and analysis and your meditation, allows us to then have a glimpse into this natural disposition of fundamental Buddha nature. When you get a glimpse of this, then you focus upon it. That's what meditation is about, is that you then begin to do everything in your capacity to really then be free from all the obscurations, knowing that that is not who you are, that your natural disposition is the fundamental, primordially enlightened mind, the Buddha nature, remaining, unearthing it, introducing yourself to it, remaining and applying all. And that is what it means to be on the path, is to allowing the path to become what creates the steadiness of the continuum of that awareness until the fruition aspect of manifesting this arises. And so that then is the power of intention. So the intention allows you to really build the confidence of that natural disposition within one's own self. Now, of course, in the Mahayana teachings, it also says that in the case of illness, it is only the main sort of the focus is about curing your own self. Whereas within the bodhichitta, it then allows one to go beyond the self and to really encompass all sentient beings. And so therefore, the greatness of the Mahayana teachings, such as the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, in the beginning aspect, almost through the first half of the teachings, emphasizes and highlights this pure intent that needs to be generated. Again and again, it becomes important to keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier as well, is that in today's times, often the aspiration or the intention is something that we neglect or are careless towards, and we jump into the action part, how to be generous and, becoming patient and diligent and ethics and so on and so forth. Whereas it must be kept in mind, as the teachings say, for any pure action to take flight, building a strong foundation of intention, aspiration is very important. One must never be one must never underestimate the power of intention. In the Mahayana teachings, again, the example of the apple seed is given for any food. So, as they say, an apple seed contains in its, if we're able to really look at it carefully, if you don't really look at it carefully, a seed may seem very inconsequential. But if you look at an apple seed with care, you will see a giant apple tree and all the apples that grow on that tree in that seed. The seed has the potential, the genetic makeup of everything that is a whole tree. So seed by itself, however insignificant and small it may look like, with careful understanding, you will see that it contains the whole tree, leaves, fruit, shade, flower, and endless capacity to give year after year after year. Like so is the enlightened intent, the intention, the aspiration to lead all sentient beings to enlightenment. Not because, again, as I said, some kind of a grand idea, but because that is the capacity that is within each one of oneself, and that is called the Buddha nature. So therefore, aspiration, bodhichitta, is very important. Bodhichitta, recognizing it, arousing it, and strengthening it with aspiration or intention. Then furthermore, through the teachings of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, what is highlighted is the point being so very precious, this intention of bodhicitta. However, how can one not see how this intention meets with so many hindrances? And amongst all of the hindrances, that what is the one that impedes it is called ignorance. Now, ignorance in this context is the ignorance of one's own innate awakened state of mind, not knowing that the fundamental makeup or the nature of you, of me, is the Buddha nature, is the awakened mind. Not seeing, not being aware, not realizing the inherent primordially enlightened Buddha mind, the basic goodness. Buddha mind or the Buddha nature is one term, but a more clear and a more, I think, accurate, you could say, or clear way of seeing what that term Buddha nature means is pure basic goodness, pure basic nature. And the not knowing this is then the ignorance. And that ignorance is manifest primarily as a dance of confusion. The dance of confusion is where instead of seeing who you fundamentally are, that you are nothing but good, is confused and seen as self. So in that moment of confusion, instead of being awake, aware of this pure nature, there's a sense of something. that sense of something splits immediately to a sense of observer and the observed, watcher and what is watched. And so therefore, immediately what is born out of that is a sense of self and the other. So that's then often in the teaching seen as the duality, the birth of duality. So one who sees self as the intrinsic instead of the Buddha nature undoubtedly immediately produces dualistic phenomena in relation to that self. And then that dualistic phenomena is sort of seen as the intrinsic, that's seen as who you are. And from this duality of the self and the phenomena, the watcher and the watched, immediately ensues, all the dualistic perceptions, and we lose the knowledge of how apparent phenomena truly functions and what the true nature and the reality of phenomena are. Gradually, when we allow this to be an assumption, what happens is it colors everything that we perceive. Our perceptions are colored by it, and it becomes a habitual way of seeing things. And then, as the habit of seeing it in this way, the duality arises, then of course the habitual patterns of dual deluded perceptions arises, and that is then primarily, as you have been studying this extensively, what imprisons us in samsara. So therefore, again, in the middle part of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, the teachings clearly point to this crucial point that the intentions, therefore, must meet the actions, so that the aspiration bodhichitta in the form of the four immeasurables must unite with the six paramitas, which are the action bodhichitta expressions. And that in the meeting of the intention, aspiration, and the action bodhichitta, then we are able to then meet the challenge of ignorance, deluded perception. We meet head-on with the challenges of ignorance and how the dualistic perceptions and the duality constantly interferes with our own primordial nature, our own basic goodness. And so the questions of meeting these different challenges of dualities really allows us to then go deeper into dissecting and seeing, and probably it can be summarized most simply in the question is, if our nature is pure, then why are we not constant with it? Why is being kind so difficult? Why is being patient so very difficult? Why is it that while we demand everyone to be ethical, why ethics is so very difficult, starting from oneself? And then we begin to see the dance and the drama of this duality of self and the others, the duality that we have created. Now that is why then, therefore, the 9th chapter of the wisdom becomes very important, because here it is where then Shantideva, and then depending upon the many commentaries and various commentaries, exhaustive commentaries that are given, there are various ways to approach the wisdom chapter. And so in sort of generalization of it, the importance of paramitas having to really unite with the wisdom quality becomes important. So therefore, as long as the text, the teachings of Shantideva itself says, as long as any of the aspiration and the action bodhicitta is not seen united and seen through the wisdom nature itself, until the wisdom allows it to be transcendent in its nature, it is always going to be difficult for the bodhicitta to arise unimpededly. That is what makes relative kindness and absolute bodhicitta into two distinctive things, sort of distinct things. And so in general, we can say that, for example, generosity remains a wonderful relative action, but it is upon its meeting with the wisdom quality of understanding the true nature beyond the ego, beyond the dualistic perception, beyond all the marks of ignorance. It is only then that that generosity can become transcendent. Likewise, moral ethics is wonderful, but it can still be a drama of the ego until it is completely united with the wisdom that sees the nature as it is, rather than the ethics or generosity or any such paramita qualities, or even the enlightened, even the intention of any positive intentions, such as loving kindness and compassion and so forth, that it will always become a relative expression of goodness, a relative generosity and patience and so forth, and will not become transcendent until it is united with the wisdom quality. Wisdom allows us to see beyond all the dualistic perceptions. It destroys the colors and the fabrications of our assumptions. And therefore, it is only through this that the generation of any of the aspiration, pure aspiration and pure action, becomes transcendent, a bodhisattva action, and a natural expression of your own fundamental basic goodness or Buddha nature. So that is why the 9th chapter becomes the absolute crucial chapter. So therefore, as it is said, in the teachings itself, Bodhisattva Charyavatara teachings, it says, Bodhisattva's ground, path, and fruition must be transcendental ground, transcendental path, and transcendental fruition. Ground must be transcendent, path must be transcendent, and then only in that way the fruition can become naturally transcendent. Parol to chinpa, paramita, transcendent as the English translation is. Then again, as many teachers have said, and I think the most beautiful way of understanding the sort of the meaning of transcendent is freedom from, or to be beyond, egocentric mentality. That is what is transcendent. Now, what it means is for the ground to become transcendent, for the path to become transcendent, what it really means is one must be able, for bodhicitta to be expressed, one must be able to have that sense of confidence of knowing this to be your natural propensity, your natural disposition. Since my basic ground, the Buddha nature itself, is nothing other than generous. Therefore, to be just generous. That's paramita. That's transcendent. What impedes the transcendent nature of such bodhicitta expressions, like let's take generosity, for example, is that if it arises because of a certain dependency on a condition, there has to be someone suffering for you to actually be generous. That's an example of when there is more dependency upon perception. Although that is, from a relative perspective, very fine. But that is relative bodhicitta, as opposed to absolute bodhicitta that must be transcendent. And that transcendence comes about not because of it needing any condition, any subject, or any dualistic perception of there being an object suffering, but that you do have the utter confidence of your nature being primordially pure and therefore nothing but generous. In simple words, a question, this could be summarized by a question, is, could we not just be generous without any reason, but just generous because that's your natural disposition? Why does patience have to have a reason? Why must there be an opposing force for you to be patient? Could you not just be patient? Now, when we look at it in this way, we will find what is being talked about here is that many of us have developed, and we try to persevere having all these wonderful qualities, such as patience or generosity. But because our perception is still caught in subjectiveness and objectiveness, there's the dualistic perception. And that dependency upon the dualistic perception, although may momentarily be good enough to keep us on track of all the bodhisattva activities, but it is riding a very fragile ground. When the conditions change, our motivation changes. And that is why we take the bodhisattva vow and we wish to earnestly be nothing but kind. But then we meet with challenges. The world doesn't behave as we expect it to be. Or the one who was the recipient of your patience and kindness didn't appreciate that. And all these different kinds of reasons begin to then bring about interruptions to that vow that we have taken. We have doubts, we have hesitation. We become distressed and discouraged. We are disappointed. And these then, again, make our vows and pledges, our own intention, much weak. And therefore, these are all called relative expressions of paramitas and bodhichitta. Whereas now with the wisdom chapter, when one sees through the wisdom chapter the nature of how things truly are, it allows us to really, the wisdom chapter really demolishes all of the different kinds of misinterpretations and misunderstandings that we have of what the true nature is like. And therefore, of course, now I think if you're already studying it, you will know how in really questioning what is the reality of phenomena. And so there are all kinds of examples that are given. One of the very simple examples that are given is in terms of any object and how they are not singular, how they are not permanent, how they are not unchanging, but that it is interdependent. And because it is interdependent, there's always constant change, constant movement, constant transition, which then allows us to see that ultimately, even when you break down to the very smallest of the atomic particles, that there is nothing but space, there is nothing but emptiness. Another very simple example that is given is the whole term. For example, if you see the term forest and we look at a forest, but then the question might be asked, what is the reality of a forest? There is no such thing as a forest. There are many trees and many different kinds of greeneries and different kinds of things, all bunched up into something that is called a forest. But our misconception in the speed of our habitual mind, driven by ignorance and its assumptions of there being a reality where there is not, we often think there is a forest. I like this forest. And we begin to allow ourselves to imagining that there is a big forest. So then in the 9th chapter, these are the different ways and many, many different ways in which the sort of the analysis are given in the most skillful of the ways that questions how we believe things to be, how our deluded perceptions are. And while if we are able to clearly dissect and analyze and examine, you will find that much of every apprehension that we have is not what it really is. And that's then called deluded perception. So such questioning becomes very important because that questioning demolishes ultimately the citadel or the fortress of our assumptions of self and the others. And when all of these assumptions of the self and the others are have no more any ground to stand upon, then I think it is what we usually say, the sort of the wisdom of no escape. I think that's a wonderful phrase. You really have no wiggle room to still think that the ego is the one that is expressing something, or that there is the reality of your perceptions of what is real are all demolished. And so when the shell of all the misconceptions of the reality of the phenomena and the subjective mind are completely torn apart, that then is what then, as again, the very classic example is that if there is a lamp in an earthen pot, and momentarily the earthen pot veils the luminous nature of the lamp, but if some strong hammer shatters that earthen pot, there is nothing that hinders the luminous nature of that lamp, and the whole environment is lit and one can see clearly. In the same way, this crucial 9th chapter of the wisdom shatters all our misconceptions and deluded perceptions, dualistic fixations, the ignorance of believing ego to being real is completely shattered. And when that is shattered, this primordial bodhichitta nature, the fundamental basic nature, the Buddha mind, illuminates unimpededly. And at that time, intention and action, bodhichitta, become simply natural expressions. It is no longer even in need of any kind of classification as intention or action. It just is. I think one of the simplest way of experiencing this directly, and some of you have had that experience, is to just simply sit quietly at the feet of our gurus. And if you are physically not with your guru or your teacher at this moment, just simply in your own meditation, if you can allow your mind to quieten down to seeing and feeling the presence of your guru, and you really look at it. And then if you don't have a teacher, if you just look at the image of the Buddha himself, for example, if you just sit at the foot of the Buddha and you really see it beyond the need of any expression or very exhaustive philosophy or any clever sort of teachings or whatever it is, within that moment of a single moment of silence, you will really have a sense of understanding what that moment is when the clay pot is shattered and the lamp's luminosity is illuminated unimpededly. It's that fundamentally each one of you have such goodness within one's own self. At the moment, covered and darkened by the egocentric mentality. But when the wisdom of analysis and seeing beyond all the assumptions that we have habitually created, when that is completely shattered, when that wisdom of no escape really brings the mind to seeing who you fundamentally are, at that moment, then you are able to really have a direct experience of what is called charya of the bodhisattvas, conduct of the bodhisattvas. The distinction between an arya, a noble one, or a bodhisattva, and an ordinary being is just simply that. Ordinary beings believe in the importance of that pot, the clay pot. Noble ones are those who have the courage to shatter that and to be able to be united with the luminous nature of your fundamental mind. When that is able to be understood, then one becomes a bodhisattva. So I think in 1 hour, that is probably what we can just sort of mention. Although, as I said in the beginning, these are things that are just so beautifully given within this powerful, wonderful philosophical text, Bodhisattva Charya Avtara. And then when it is taught by wonderful teachers such as Khandro Rinpoche, then I think this should be seen as the one thing in your life that you can be all very proud of and have the satisfaction of knowing that you have indeed brought the precious human birth to fruition. So please continue to study well. Please continue to work hard. Oftentimes, life provides you with many different thoughts and ideas of what you could do and how you could do, and the many things that you could do that are what we think useful. As I said in the beginning, modern day meditators are very proactive. So you think you need to do this or do that, and actions, we allow them to define who we are. And that is, I think, a mistake in many cases. Of course, wherever you can be helpful, wherever all the activities are very nice, you can continue to do that. But ultimately, you will realize, and it is important to realize, that there is nothing that makes more sense or will be more helpful to many others, and especially to you, than to really come in direct contact and to realize your own fundamental nature. And for that, meditation is very important. The 9th chapter, wisdom, is the view, but that view has to be that what really beautifies the samadhi, the equipoise, the meditative equipoise. And so through meditation, the direct understanding of your fundamental nature, that then should be seen as the most important thing. That's the best gift you can give to all sentient beings. There is nothing more important than this that can truly repay the kindness of all the mother-like sentient beings. And if you really truly want to be compassionate towards others, and especially towards yourself, nothing is more important than the realization of bodhichitta, your intrinsic nature. Not to just think about it, not to just think of it as something to discuss and talk about. It's not a philosophy. It is who you are. And to be able to unmistakably understand that and be constant in manifesting it, that is the path of the bodhisattvas. Okay, so that's that. And now Robin and Myoshin, and you can all take over.
Thank you so much, Rinpoche. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but I'm sure these teachings have given us more than enough to practice with and to reflect on. So thank you so much. And this does bring us to the end of today's program. So thank you, everyone, for attending and participating. It's a real joy to gather together to receive these teachings. And thank you very much to the many staff and volunteers working behind the scenes to make this event possible. To the web host team and the translators, helping to make these teachings available in 9 different languages throughout the world. And once again, a very special thank you to you, Jetsün Khandro Rinpoche, for sharing these precious teachings with us and for doing so with such warmth and clarity, and to make these incredibly profound teachings so very accessible. So please do come back and continue to teach us. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much. And so now I would like to welcome our Umzi, Peter, to lead us in the closing dedication prayer.
Thank you, Robin. So we'll chant the dedication prayer once in Tibetan and once in your own language. Senam di tam che pani top ne pedranam pam chene kedana chivala trupai si pezole trova trova sho By this merit, may all attain omniscience and defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness and death, from the ocean of existence, may all beings be free. Thank you, and back to Robin.
Thank you, Dita. And just before we go, if you enjoyed this event, we'll be glad to know there are a series of online retreats coming up with Mingyur Rinpoche. The Mind of a Bodhisattva retreat will take place June 17th to 20th. And during this retreat, Mingyur Rinpoche will present core elements from Shantideva's famous 9th chapter of The Way of the Bodhisattva, which focuses on wisdom, the realization of emptiness. And there will also be guided practice sessions, small discussion groups, and Q&A sessions as well. And coming up this weekend, May 28th to 29th, we have the Befriending Challenging Emotions retreat. So in this retreat, you will learn how to stop avoiding and blocking difficult emotions, to cultivate the ability to be present with challenging emotions, apply different meditation techniques in daily life practice, and use triggers as support for meditation as well. And in addition to teachings from Mingyur Rinpoche and Tergar guides, there will also be group practice sessions, small discussion groups, and extra Q&A sessions included in the retreat. Also, if you happen to be located near Minneapolis, then you have the option to register in person as well. So you can find out more about these and other Tergar events by visiting events.tergar.org. Finally, thank you to our sponsors, whose generosity helps to make all of these wonderful events possible. So thank you, everyone, once again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.